Tessa Hart pulled her thick auburn hair into a high ponytail, her gloved fingers trembling slightly from the cold seeping through the thin material of her jacket. The rink was almost empty, the fluorescent lights casting a pale blue glow over the glossy expanse of ice. It was late, and her muscles ached from hours of practice, but she refused to leave until she nailed her routine. "All right, Tessa," she murmured to herself, bending her knees in preparation. "Triple Lutz, no more excuses," she pushed off, gliding across the ice with the grace that only years of grueling training could produce. Her skates carved perfect arcs into the frozen surface, and as she prepared for her jump, she held her breath, letting the rhythm of her movements guide her. Gathering momentum, she leaped, spinning in the air, 3 rotations, before her left skate nicked the edge of her landing, and she stumbled, barely avoiding a fall. "Ugh," Tessa groaned, frustration bubbling up in her chest. "Come on!" Before she could reset for another attempt, the doors to the rink burst open, and a chorus of laughter and loud voices echoed through the space. Tessa whipped around, her eyes narrowing at the group of guys spilling onto the ice, hockey sticks clutched in their gloved hands. The Stormwolves, the university's pride and joy, and every figure skater's worst nightmare. "Oh, fantastic," Tessa muttered, crossing her arms as she watched them scatter across the rink, oblivious to her presence. Because sharing with hockey players is exactly what I wanted right now. One of them, a tall guy with dark, unruly hair peeking out from under his helmet, broke away from the group, skating towards her with a cocky grin. Liam Hayes, captain of the Stormwolves, and the most infuriating person Tessa had ever met. His easy charm and self-assured swagger had everyone wrapped around his finger. Everyone but her. "Hey there, princess," Liam called out, his voice dripping with mockery. He skidded to a stop a few feet away, spraying ice shavings in her direction. "Still practicing those little twirls of yours?" Tessa clenched her jaw, taking a step back to avoid the ice flecks. "Not that it's any of your business, Hayes, but yes. Some of us actually use this rink for training, not just to show off." He feigned a look of hurt, pressing a gloved hand to his chest. "Ouch, you wound me, Hart, but don't worry, we'll stay out of your way." He turned and called out to his teammates, "All right, boys, let's warm up." Tessa glared at him, her frustration boiling over. "I have the rink booked until 10, you know. That means it's still my time." Liam raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Really? Because last I checked, the world doesn't revolve around your ice princess schedule." She opened her mouth to retort, but before she could get a word in, he had skated off to join his team, leaving her standing there, seething. The rest of the players were already shooting pucks and shouting at each other, turning the once serene rink into a chaotic arena. Tessa took a deep breath, willing herself to stay calm. She had dealt with these interruptions more times than she could count, and every time it was the same story. The hockey team thought they owned the rink, and no amount of scheduling or negotiating ever seemed to change that. She turned away, determined to block out the noise and focus on her routine. She was about to set up for her triple Lutz again when a puck whizzed past her, narrowly missing her leg. She stumbled, her skate catching on the ice, and this time she did fall, landing hard on her side. "Are you kidding me?" she shouted, glaring at the offending puck as it rolled to a stop near the boards. Liam skated over, concern flickering briefly across his face before his usual smirk returned. "Whoa, you all right there? Didn't mean to scare you." Tessa shot him a glare that could have melted the entire rink. "Maybe if you learned to aim, I wouldn't have to dodge your stray pucks." He offered her a hand, but she swatted it away, pushing herself up with as much dignity as she could muster. "I don't need your help," she snapped. Liam sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, Hart, we're just trying to get some practice in. No need to be so dramatic." "Dramatic?" Tessa repeated, her voice rising. "You nearly took my leg off and I'm being dramatic." "Hey," he said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "No need to bite my head off. We'll try to keep it to our half of the rink, all right?" She huffed, turning away from him. "Just stay out of my way." As she skated back to the center, her heart was pounding, not just from anger, but from the way his piercing blue eyes had met hers for that brief, infuriating moment. She hated how he got under her skin, how he always seemed to have the upper hand, but she wouldn't let him ruin her focus. She had goals, and unlike the hockey team's short-lived glory, hers required precision, discipline, and absolute dedication. Tessa inhaled deeply, trying to shake off the collision of emotions Liam always seemed to trigger. She'd learned to compartmentalize her feelings on the ice, to let the cold wash away everything but her focus and drive. Tonight, however, that wall felt particularly fragile. She closed her eyes, centering herself. When she opened them, the chaos of the hockey practice blurred into the background. Only the ice mattered. Pushing off again, she traced the familiar patterns with her blades, building momentum until she launched into her jump. Her arms sliced through the air, her body spinning in a perfect arc, and this time, she landed cleanly. "Finally," she whispered, relief and pride mingling in her voice. The satisfaction was short-lived. A roar of cheers erupted from the far side of the rink, and she couldn't help but glance over. Liam had just scored, his teammates crowding around him in celebration. Even from this distance, she could see his confident grin, the easy way he carried himself as if the world were his to conquer. Tessa turned away, annoyed with herself for even looking. Liam Hayes might be the town's golden boy, but she refused to let him steal her spotlight, especially here, in the one place where she had control. She spent the next hour running through her routine, perfecting each element, despite the occasional distractions from the hockey team. When the rink clock finally hit 10, she allowed herself to breathe a sigh of relief. Her time was officially up, and she could finally leave the freezing rink behind. As she bent down to untie her skates, she overheard Liam talking to one of his teammates, Jax Turner, a defenseman with an easy smile and a reputation for being the team's laid-back joker. "Man, you've got to give Hart some credit," Jax said, nodding toward Tessa. "She's tough as hell, always out here late." Liam glanced over, his expression unreadable. "Yeah, well, she's stubborn. Probably why she keeps falling." Tessa's hands stilled on her laces, her ears burning. She shouldn't care what Liam thought, she knew that, but his words stung more than she wanted to admit. With her jaw clenched, she yanked her skates off, slipped on her warm boots, and grabbed her bag. "Stubbornness gets results," she muttered under her breath as she walked past Liam and Jax. Liam turned, surprised, but Tessa didn't give him a chance to reply. She marched out of the rink, her head held high, and didn't look back. The next morning, Tessa's alarm blared at 6 a.m., pulling her from a restless sleep. She groaned, rolling over and burying her face in her pillow. Her muscles ached from the late-night practice, but there was no room in her schedule for laziness. She had a full day of classes, followed by another grueling practice session. If she wanted to make the national figure skating team, she had to be relentless. "Up and at 'em," came a cheerful voice from the other side of the room. Tessa's best friend and roommate, Brooke Simmons, stood by the window, pulling back the curtains to let in the early morning sunlight. Her honey blonde hair was pulled into a messy bun, and she was already dressed in her art student uniform of paint-splattered overalls. Tessa groaned again, squinting at the light. "How are you so awake?" Brooke laughed, tossing a pillow in her direction. "Because I don't skate until midnight, unlike some people. Now get up, coffee's brewing, and you've got that meeting before class, remember?" Tessa sat up, the reminder jolting her awake. The university athletics department had called an all-sports meeting for the morning, and rumor had it there were going to be big announcements. She sighed, swinging her legs out of bed. "Right, the mysterious meeting. Think they're finally getting rid of the hockey team?" Brooke grinned, as if. The university would probably sell its soul to keep those guys happy. Tessa pulled on a sweatshirt and leggings, running a brush through her hair before throwing it into a ponytail. "Yeah, well, we'll see what this is about. Thanks for the wake-up call, Brooke." "Any time," Brooke said, winking. "Go kick some ass, Ice Queen." The auditorium was packed, the hum of conversations echoing off the high ceilings. Athletes from every sport filled the seats, from the track team in their running gear to the swim team with damp hair and oversized jackets. Tessa slid into a seat near the front, crossing her arms as she waited. The hockey team arrived a few minutes later, loud and rowdy as always. Liam led the way, laughing at something Jax said, but when his gaze met Tessa's, his smile faltered. He gave her a nod, one she didn't return, and took a seat with his teammates a few rows behind her. The athletic director, a tall man with a booming voice and a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped up to the podium. "All right, everyone, settle down," he said, and the room fell silent. "We have an exciting announcement today. As you all know, our university takes great pride in our athletic programs, and we're always looking for ways to engage the community and support our teams." Tessa shifted in her seat, her curiosity piqued. "To that end," the director continued, "we're organizing a major winter fundraiser. It's called the Winter Spectacular, and it'll be a showcase of all our sports, with the highlight being a special performance right here on campus." Murmurs spread through the crowd. "A showcase? That sounded like a lot of extra work." The director held up a hand for silence. "Each sports team will pair up with another for this event. We want to see collaboration, creativity, and school spirit. And yes, this performance will be open to the public, with proceeds going toward facility improvements and scholarships." Tessa's stomach sank. Collaboration? That meant. "Our committee has already determined the pairings," the director said, pulling out a sheet of paper. "Figure skating will be paired with," he paused, and Tessa's heart skipped a beat, "the hockey team." A collective gasp and a few chuckles rippled through the audience. Tessa felt her face flush. Of course, it couldn't have been the swim team or the track team. No, it had to be the hockey players. She turned in her seat, catching Liam's eye. He looked just as shocked as she felt, his eyebrows raised. For a moment they stared at each other, both processing the news. Then his mouth curved into a small, infuriating smirk. Tessa's hands clenched into fists. "Great," she muttered, "just great." Tessa tried to focus on her classes that day, but her mind kept drifting back to the fundraiser. The idea of working with the hockey team made her stomach twist in knots. How were they supposed to come up with a performance that blended figure skating and hockey? The two sports were about as compatible as oil and water. After her last class, she headed straight for the rink, hoping that skating would clear her mind. But when she arrived, Liam was already there, sitting on the boards with his skates slung over his shoulder. He spotted her and hopped down, his grin widening. "Hey, partner," he drawled. Tessa shot him a glare. "Don't call me that." He laughed, completely unbothered. "Look, I'm not thrilled about this either, but maybe it won't be so bad. We've just got to figure out how to make it work." She crossed her arms, her frustration boiling over. Make it work? Do you even realize how hard it is to choreograph a routine that combines two totally different sports? This isn't some game, Liam. This is my life. His smile faded and he rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, I get it. But this is important for us, too. We need the funding as much as you do." Tessa stared at him, surprised by the seriousness in his voice. For a moment, she saw a flicker of something vulnerable in his expression, something that didn't fit with the cocky image he always projected. But she quickly pushed the thought aside. "Fine," she said, her voice clipped. "We'll work together. But don't get in my way, and don't screw this up." Liam's eyes darkened, and his jaw tightened. "I could say the same to you, Hart." The tension crackled between them like static electricity, but neither of them backed down. This was going to be a long and complicated partnership, and neither one of them was ready to admit just how much they were already getting under each other's skin. The next afternoon, Tessa made her way back to the rink with a sense of dread weighing heavy in her chest. She'd spent the entire morning replaying the conversation with Liam in her head, and no matter how she spun it, she couldn't shake the feeling that this collaboration was doomed from the start. The rink was already buzzing with activity when she arrived. The hockey team was gathered on one end, some of the players joking around while others taped their sticks or adjusted their pads. Liam was at the center of the group, laughing at something Jack said. His easy charisma radiated through the space, drawing people to him like a magnet. Tessa couldn't help but roll her eyes. She didn't understand how someone could be so annoyingly confident all the time. She focused on the figure skaters gathered at the opposite end of the rink, her fellow athletes stretching and warming up. Her best friend, Brooke, was there, standing next to their choreographer, a strict but passionate woman named Marla Grant. Brooke waved her over. "Hey, Tessa, ready for this?" Tessa groaned, dropping her bag next to Brooke's. "As ready as I'll ever be." Marla doesn't look too happy. Marla stood with her arms crossed, her dark hair pulled back into a severe bun. She had a no-nonsense approach to skating, and her sharp eyes missed nothing. "All right, everyone, listen up," Marla called out, her voice cutting through the chatter. "We have a monumental challenge ahead of us, and I'm not about to let this turn into a circus act. We're figure skaters, not performers in some chaotic hockey stunt show." Tessa bit back a smile. At least Marla was on her side. The athletic director stepped onto the ice, his shoes slipping a bit as he tried to maintain his balance. "All right, athletes, gather around," he called. "Let's get this meeting started." Tessa and Brooke skated over, joining the hockey players and the rest of the figure skaters in the center of the rink. Liam was already there, standing with his hands on his hips. When he saw Tessa, his eyes sparked with something she couldn't quite read. Amusement? Annoyance? Maybe a mix of both. "Okay," the athletic director began, looking slightly winded from the effort of not slipping on the ice. "As you know, the Winter Spectacular is a big deal. We want this to be a memorable performance, something that showcases the best of what our teams have to offer. We expect you all to work together to create something incredible." He paused, looking between the figure skaters and the hockey player. "To help facilitate this, we've assigned leaders from each team to coordinate. Tessa Hart will represent the figure skaters, and Liam Hayes will represent the hockey team." Tessa's stomach dropped. Of course, just her luck. She glanced at Liam, who raised an eyebrow, clearly just as surprised as she was. But then he smirked, as if relishing the challenge. Tessa felt her hands clench into fists at her sides. "Great," she muttered under her breath. "Just what I needed." Marla stepped forward. "We'll have to start planning immediately. This isn't just about blending our sports. It's about creating a seamless performance that flows. We need choreography that highlights both skating and hockey, and we only have a few weeks to make this happen." Liam's voice cut through the conversation. "Well, we've got the power and speed. You all have the grace and technique. Seems like a perfect match, right?" He shot Tessa a teasing grin. She met his gaze head-on, refusing to be intimidated. "Perfect match? Sure. As long as you don't trip over your own skates." A few of the figure skaters snickered, but Liam just chuckled, as if her sarcasm amused him. "Don't worry, Ice Queen," he said, using the nickname that grated on her nerves. "I'll keep up." Tessa bit back a retort, determined not to let him get under her skin. But as the athletic director wrapped up the meeting and the athletes began to disperse, she couldn't shake the knot of anxiety twisting in her gut. This wasn't going to be easy, and she knew that working with Liam would test her patience in ways she hadn't even imagined. That evening, the two teams had their first practice session together. The tension in the air was thick, and it didn't help that Marla and the hockey team's coach, Coach Harris, had their own ideas of how things should go. Marla wanted precision and beauty, while Coach Harris pushed for intensity and grit. It was a clash of cultures, and the athletes were caught in the middle. Tessa pulled on her skates, lacing them tightly as she prepared to face whatever chaos awaited. Brooke leaned over, whispering, "Think you'll survive this?" Tessa forced a smile. "Barely, if Liam doesn't drive me insane first." Brooke giggled, but her laughter was cut short when Liam skated over, his hockey stick in hand and a confident gleam in his eyes. "Ready, Hart?" he asked, a hint of challenge in his voice. Tessa straightened, meeting his gaze. "Always." Marla clapped her hands, drawing everyone's attention. "All right, let's start with a simple warm-up. I want the figure skaters to demonstrate a basic spin combination, and then we'll see how the hockey players can integrate into it." Liam exchanged a glance with Jax, who looked skeptical. "Spin combination?" Jax said. "Like a twirl?" Tessa rolled her eyes. "Not a twirl, a spin. There's a difference." Liam shrugged, leaning on his stick. "Show us how it's done, then." Tessa took a deep breath, determined not to let his smug attitude affect her. She pushed off, gliding smoothly across the ice. Her skates sliced through the surface with precision as she moved into a camel spin, her body extending gracefully before transitioning into a sit spin. Finally, she rose into a scratch spin, her movements flawless and elegant. When she finished, she looked at the hockey players, daring them to comment. Liam's eyes had a spark of interest, as if he were genuinely impressed, but he quickly masked it with a smirk. "Not bad," he said, but let's see how that fits with a hockey stop. Before Tessa could respond, Liam skated forward, gaining speed. He pulled to a sudden stop just feet from her, sending a spray of ice into the air. Tessa jumped back, scowling. "Watch it, Hayes," he chuckled, "just adding a little flair." Marla sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "This isn't a comedy routine, Liam. We need control, not chaos." Coach Harris chimed in. "Actually, Hayes, that was a solid stop, but let's work on coordination. You need to understand the rhythm of the spins if we're going to make this work." Tessa could see the frustration simmering in Liam's expression. He wasn't used to being told to tone things down, and she could sense that this performance was going to be as much about learning each other's strengths as it was about the choreography. They spent the next hour attempting to merge the figure skating spins with the hockey team's fast-paced maneuvers. Every attempt ended in some kind of disaster. Either the hockey players overshot their marks, or the figure skaters stumbled to avoid colliding with them. Tessa's patience wore thinner with each failed run. At one point, Jax nearly knocked over one of the skaters, and Brooke had to swerve to avoid a fall. "This is impossible," Brooke exclaimed, throwing her hands in the air. "We're going to break something or someone if we keep this up." Tessa felt her own frustration boiling over. "Maybe if you guys actually paid attention to what we're doing, we wouldn't be having this problem." Liam's eyes narrowed. "Oh, so now it's our fault? Maybe if you figure skaters didn't act like the ice was your personal stage, we'd have more room to work with." Tessa stepped forward, her voice rising. "We have to act like it's a stage. That's the whole point of performing, Hayes. This isn't just about brute force, it's about precision and timing." "Brute force?" Liam scoffed, dropping his hockey stick. "You think that's all we do? Maybe you should try playing a game with hits and checks and see how graceful you feel afterward." Marla and Coach Harris stepped in, trying to defuse the situation, but the tension between Tessa and Liam was palpable. They glared at each other, both too stubborn to back down. "Enough," Marla said sharply. "We're getting nowhere with this bickering. Take 5 minutes to cool off, both of you." Tessa clenched her jaw but obeyed, skating off to the side. Her heart pounded with anger, and she struggled to calm herself. This partnership was a nightmare, and Liam Hayes was at the center of it. After practice, Tessa lingered at the rink, watching as the hockey team packed up their gear. She was still seething, replaying every infuriating comment Liam had made. But as she watched him interact with his teammates, she noticed something she hadn't expected, the way he seemed to genuinely care about them. He patted Jax on the back, joked with the goalie, and offered encouragement to one of the younger players who'd had a rough practice. For a moment, her anger wavered. Liam was obnoxious, yes, but he was also a leader. Someone who clearly took his role seriously, even if his confidence grated on her nerves. Liam caught her staring, and his smirk returned. He skated over, stopping in front of her with that maddening ease. "Enjoying the show?" he asked. Tessa crossed her arms, her guard snapping back into place. "Just wondering how long it'll take for you to mess up again." He chuckled, the sound annoyingly genuine. "You know, for someone who calls herself graceful, you're pretty good at throwing punches." She felt her cheeks heat, but she refused to let him see her flustered. "And for someone who thinks he's the king of the ice, you're not as smooth as you think." Liam's grin widened, but this time there was something different in his eyes. An acknowledgement of the challenge she posed, maybe even a hint of respect. "Guess we'll just have to prove each other wrong then." Tessa held his gaze, her heart beating faster for reasons she didn't want to think about. She wasn't ready to admit that there might be more to Liam Hayes than she'd assumed, but as they stared each other down, she knew one thing for sure. This partnership was far from over, and the sparks flying between them were only just beginning. The next day, Tessa woke up with a lingering sense of unease. The constant clashing with Liam was exhausting, and the weight of their shared responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. She poured herself a cup of coffee and slumped into a chair in her small apartment, her mind racing through possible choreography ideas. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice Brooke come in, holding a canvas splattered with paint. "Wow, you look like you didn't sleep," Brooke said, setting the canvas aside. Tessa sighed, rubbing her temples. "Because I didn't. I'm starting to think this whole collaboration is cursed." Brooke sat across from her, a look of sympathy on her face. Hey, it's only been one practice. You two will figure it out. Maybe you just need to talk to him outside of the rink, without the pressure. Tessa frowned. The idea of spending more time with Liam wasn't exactly appealing, but Brooke had a point. If they kept going like this, they'd never get anywhere. I don't know, she admitted, but it's worth a shot, I guess. Brooke's eyes lit up. See? That's the spirit. Maybe you'll find out he's not such a jerk after all. Tessa snorted. Unlikely. Later that afternoon, Tessa stood outside the rink, nervously fiddling with the straps of her skate bag. The chilly November air bit at her cheeks, and she found herself wishing she'd worn a warmer jacket. She had texted Liam earlier, asking if they could meet before practice to talk, and he had agreed, though his response had been predictably cocky, sure, Ice Queen. Let's see if we can avoid killing each other. When Liam finally arrived, he was dressed in his usual hockey gear, his helmet tucked under his arm. He approached with a confident stride, his smirk firmly in place. All right, Hart. What's this about? Are you finally admitting that I'm right? Tessa rolled her eyes. Don't flatter yourself. I just think we need to try and work together without constantly butting heads. We're supposed to be partners after all. He raised an eyebrow, looking genuinely surprised. Partners, huh? That's a change of heart. She crossed her arms, unwilling to give him an inch. I'm not saying I like it. I'm just saying that if we don't find common ground, we're going to make fools of ourselves in front of the entire school, and the public. Liam studied her for a moment, and she couldn't help but notice how his playful demeanor seemed to shift. He looked thoughtful, even a little serious. All right, he said, his voice lower and more sincere. You're right. This thing is important, and I don't want to screw it up either. Tessa blinked, caught off guard. She hadn't expected him to agree so easily. Really? She asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. No sarcastic comeback? He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. Believe it or not, I know when to be serious. Hockey is my life, and this performance means a lot to the team. So, yeah, I'm willing to try. His admission disarmed her. For the first time, she saw past the arrogance to the driven athlete underneath. Maybe they weren't so different after all, both fiercely dedicated to their sports. Okay, she said slowly. Then let's come up with some ideas. We need something that shows off the best of both sports. Liam's eyes lit up with interest. What if we did something that highlighted speed and power, he suggested. Like you could start with a routine that's graceful and controlled, and then we could bring in the hockey players to show how the ice transforms into a battlefield. Tessa tilted her head, considering his idea. That could work, but it would have to flow seamlessly. No awkward transitions. He grinned, that familiar spark of challenge returning. No problem. We'll make it look effortless. They stood there in the cold, tossing around ideas and debating choreography, and for the first time, Tessa felt like they might actually be able to pull this off. Liam's enthusiasm was infectious, and she found herself almost enjoying his company. The following practice was different. The tension between the figure skaters and the hockey players had eased slightly, though there was still an underlying sense of competition. Tessa stood in the middle of the rink, demonstrating a new sequence of steps she and Liam had come up with. The hockey players watched, some looking genuinely interested, while others exchanged skeptical glances. All right, she called out. We're going to start with a simple sequence. Skaters, follow my lead, and hockey players, watch how we move. Liam stepped up beside her, his skates already laced up. Ready? He asked, his voice low enough for only her to hear. Tessa nodded, feeling an unexpected thrill at having him as a partner. Ready? They began the routine, Tessa leading with a series of elegant glides and Liam following with powerful strides. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Liam's movements were strong and commanding, contrasting beautifully with Tessa's fluid grace. They worked through the sequence over and over, adjusting and fine-tuning as they went. Marla and Coach Harris watched from the sidelines, occasionally offering input but mostly letting the athletes figure things out on their own. The figure skaters and hockey players exchanged notes, the initial animosity between the teams slowly giving way to a grudging respect. After an hour, Jack skated up to Liam, breathing hard. Man, this is harder than it looks, he admitted, wiping sweat from his forehead. How do you keep from getting dizzy with all those spins? Liam grinned, clapping Jax on the back. Maybe Tessa should give you a lesson. Jax looked over at Tessa, who was taking a sip from her water bottle. She caught his gaze and raised an eyebrow. What's that look for? She asked, her tone teasing. Jax held up his hands in mock surrender. Just wondering how you managed to make spinning in circles look so easy. Tessa couldn't help but laugh, the sound surprising even herself. Years of practice, she said. Want to give it a try? Jax groaned. No way. I'd fall on my face. The moment of levity was enough to break some of the tension, and Tessa found herself smiling. Maybe this collaboration wouldn't be a total disaster. After practice, Tessa stayed behind to work on a particularly tricky jump. The rink was quiet, the ice gleaming under the soft overhead lights. She skated across the surface, building speed before launching into a triple Lutz. She landed it, but not as cleanly as she wanted, and she groaned in frustration. Still here? Came a familiar voice. Tessa turned to see Liam standing at the edge of the rink, his gear mostly off except for his skates. He looked tired but intrigued, his dark hair mussed from practice. What are you doing here? She asked, surprised. He shrugged. I could ask you the same thing, but I'm guessing perfectionism runs deep. She bristled, but his tone was light, almost playful. It's not perfectionism, she insisted. It's making sure I get it right. Liam stepped onto the ice, skating over to her with a practiced ease that was annoyingly impressive. Mind if I watch? Tessa hesitated, then sighed. Fine, but if you laugh, I'll kick you. He held up his hands. Promise, no laughing. She took a deep breath, skating backward to gain momentum. She set up for the jump, launching into the air and rotating 3 times before landing. This time the landing was cleaner, though not perfect. Still, it was progress. Liam nodded, a look of genuine admiration on his face. That was impressive. How do you do it? The jump, I mean. Tessa glanced at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. A lot of practice. It's all about timing, positioning, and trusting your body to follow through. He seemed to think about that, his brow furrowing. Sounds like hockey, he said. Except we don't have time to think. We just react. She tilted her head, curious. What's it like, being in the middle of a game? Liam's eyes lit up, and for the first time she saw a different side of him. It's exhilarating. Everything happens so fast, and you're just running on adrenaline and instinct. You're part of something bigger, but at the same time, it's all on you to make the right moves. Tessa found herself drawn in by his description, the way his passion for the sport shone through. She realized with a start that she'd never really thought about what hockey meant to him, or to any of the players. To her, it had always been a noisy, aggressive sport that interfered with her skating. But hearing Liam talk about it, she felt a flicker of understanding. I guess we're not so different, she said quietly. Liam's gaze softened. Maybe not. They stood there in the stillness of the rink, an unexpected truce forming between them. Tessa's heart thudded in her chest, and she wondered if she was imagining the warmth in Liam's eyes. But before she could think too much about it, he grinned and stepped back. Come on, he said. Show me that jump again. I want to see if I can figure out how you make it look so effortless. Tessa rolled her eyes, but she couldn't help smiling. Effortless, huh? You're in for a surprise. And as they worked together under the glow of the rink lights, she realized that maybe, just maybe, there was more to Liam Hayes than she'd ever given him credit for. The following week brought a new rhythm to practices, a subtle shift that had everyone on edge in the best possible way. Tessa and Liam's truce didn't go unnoticed. Their interaction seemed less fraught with tension, replaced with a simmering energy that was almost as distracting. The figure skaters and hockey players found themselves whispering, wondering if the supposed enemies to partners duo was hiding more than just a professional understanding. At the next practice, Liam skated in with that trademark swagger. He glanced around at the figure skaters who were gathered near the boards, warming up with spins and jumps. Tessa was stretching, her long hair pulled into a high ponytail, her face focused. He made a beeline for her, unable to resist the opportunity to tease her. He called, stopping just close enough to make her pause mid-stretch. Tessa looked up, narrowing her eyes. Liam, she replied, her voice cool but lacking the venom it once held. Shouldn't you be practicing slap shots instead of bothering me? He crossed his arms, a playful smile spreading across his face. We've got plenty of time for that. Besides, I have a proposition for you. She straightened, curiosity and skepticism warring on her face. What kind of proposition? He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so the others wouldn't hear. How about a little wager? If I can land a double jump on skates, after you teach me, of course, you have to come to one of my games and cheer me on. Tessa blinked, her mouth falling open slightly. The idea of Liam, the star hockey player, attempting a figure skating jump was both ridiculous and hilarious. She crossed her arms, eyeing him as if to gauge his seriousness. And if you fail? She countered, unable to resist the competitive spark. Liam's grin widened. Then I'll do whatever you want. You name the stakes. Her lips curved into a smile she couldn't hide. The thought of putting him through the agony of extra skating drills or making him wear a ridiculous costume on the ice was tempting. You're on, she said. But I'm warning you, this won't be easy. I thrive on challenges, he shot back. Tessa shook her head, the absurdity of the situation sinking in. But deep down, she had to admit she was excited. Liam, for all his arrogance, had a way of making things interesting. The next day, the rink was quieter than usual. Only a few figure skaters lingered around to watch what promised to be a spectacle. Liam Hayes, the school's golden boy of hockey, taking a stab at figure skating. Tessa felt a mix of amusement and determination as she laced up her skates. This was her world, and she was going to make sure he respected it. Liam stepped onto the ice with the confidence of someone who owned it. All right, coach, he said, giving Tessa a mock salute. How do we start? Tessa rolled her eyes, but a smile tugged at her lips. First, we warm up. You're not going to land anything if you pull a muscle. He followed her lead as she guided him through basic stretches and warm-up drills. His movements were stiff and awkward compared to her graceful fluidity, and she couldn't help but laugh when he stumbled slightly. Not so easy, is it? She teased. He shot her a mock glare. I'm just getting started. Wait till you see my real skills. Once they were warmed up, Tessa explained the mechanics of the double jump. She demonstrated the motion with ease, launching into the air and landing with a soft glide that looked effortless. Liam watched intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. All right, he said, more serious than she'd seen him in a while. Let's do this. He tried and failed spectacularly. His first attempt ended with him landing flat on his back, the sound of his fall echoing through the rink. Tessa bit her lip to keep from laughing, but it was no use. She burst into giggles, and the sound was bright and infectious. Liam groaned, sitting up and rubbing his sore back. Glad you're enjoying this, he muttered. Tessa skated over, offering him a hand. Come on, get up, you'll get it eventually. He accepted her hand, and for a split second, their eyes met. Tessa's laughter faded as she felt a spark, something she wasn't ready to name. But then he was standing, brushing himself off, and the moment passed. They spent the next hour working on the jump, with Liam growing increasingly frustrated. His natural athleticism helped, but figure skating required a level of precision and grace he wasn't used to. Tessa, for her part, found herself oddly invested in helping him succeed. She gave him tips, corrected his posture, and even demonstrated the jump multiple times. By the end of the session, he still hadn't landed the double jump, but he'd come close. His determination was admirable, and Tessa found herself rooting for him in spite of herself. Not bad, she admitted as they left the ice. You might just pull it off. Liam looked at her, his hair damp with sweat, his blue eyes alight with challenge. I told you, Hart, I never back down from a bet. Tessa felt her heart race, but she ignored it, brushing past him with a smirk. We'll see about that. Their partnership continued to evolve, each practice bringing new challenges and, to Tessa's surprise, moments of genuine camaraderie. The choreography was finally coming together, a mix of elegance and intensity that showcased both their strengths. The hockey players had even started to respect the figure skaters and vice versa. There were fewer snide remarks, more shared laughter, and a sense of unity beginning to form. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. One afternoon, As Tessa and Liam were working on a particularly difficult lift, things went wrong. Liam was supposed to lift her effortlessly, but he misjudged the timing, and Tessa felt herself slipping. She let out a startled gasp as she fell, bracing for impact. But before she hit the ice, Liam caught her, his arms wrapping around her in a protective embrace. They both went down, landing in a heap, but his body cushioned her fall. Tessa's heart pounded in her chest as she found herself pressed against him, their faces inches apart. She could feel his breath on her skin, see the worry in his eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice husky. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The world seemed to slow, and she was acutely aware of how close they were. "I'm fine," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam's gaze dropped to her lips, and Tessa felt her breath hitch. Was he about to, "All right, lovebirds, break it up," someone called, shattering the moment. Tessa scrambled to her feet, her face flaming. She avoided Liam's eyes as she brushed herself off, feeling mortified. What had just happened, and why had she felt? Disappointed when they'd been interrupted? Liam stood as well, his usual cockiness replaced by something she couldn't quite read. "Sorry about that," he said, his voice oddly subdued. "It's fine," she replied, still flustered. "Let's try again." They went back to work, but the tension between them was palpable, a spark that refused to die down. Tessa tried to focus, but her mind kept replaying the way his arms had felt around her, the way he'd looked at her as if he'd wanted to. She shook her head, determined to push the thought away. This was just a collaboration, nothing more. She couldn't afford to get distracted by Liam Hayes, no matter how infuriatingly attractive he was. That night, Tessa lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She couldn't stop thinking about Liam, about the way he made her feel. It was infuriating. How had they gone from enemies to whatever this was? And why did she care so much? She groaned, burying her face in her pillow. This wasn't part of the plan. She had her goals, her skating, and she didn't have time for distractions, especially not distractions that came in the form of a cocky hockey player who somehow made her laugh and challenged her in ways no one else did. Her phone buzzed, and she reached for it, half expecting it to be Brooke or one of her skating friends. But when she saw Liam's name on the screen, her heart skipped a beat. "Hey, just wanted to make sure you're okay after today. Sorry for the rough landing." Tessa stared at the message, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She wasn't sure how to respond. He was being nice, thoughtful even, and it threw her off balance. "I'm fine," she finally replied. "Thanks for catching me." A few seconds later, his reply came, "Anytime, Ice Queen." She couldn't help but smile, her annoyance melting away. Maybe things were more complicated than she wanted to admit, but for now she was willing to see where this partnership, and whatever else was brewing between them, might lead. The days passed, and the routines grew more refined. The chemistry between Tessa and Liam was undeniable. On the ice, their movements flowed together seamlessly, a dance of grace and raw energy that had the rest of the team watching in awe. But off the ice, the lines between rivalry and something deeper blurred with every passing moment. Tessa felt it, and she knew Liam did too. It all came to a head one Friday evening. Brooke had convinced Tessa to take a break from their grueling practice schedule and join her for a night out. "You need to blow off some steam," Brooke had insisted, tugging Tessa away from her relentless focus on skating. "A little fun won't kill you." Tessa reluctantly agreed, letting Brooke pull her into a lively downtown bar packed with students and the steady pulse of music. The place was buzzing with energy, bright neon lights, laughter, and the hum of conversation. It wasn't her usual scene, but she had to admit the change of pace was nice. Brooke wasted no time ordering drinks, but as they settled into a booth with their friends, Tessa couldn't quite shake the sense of unease she felt being away from the rink. She knew she was obsessing over the performance, but the pressure to succeed gnawed at her. And then, as if the universe had a sense of humor, she spotted a familiar figure weaving through the crowd. Liam. He was there with a group of his hockey teammates, all of them laughing and jostling each other in typical boisterous fashion. Liam was in the center of it, looking relaxed and undeniably handsome in a dark blue button-up shirt that brought out the deep blue of his eyes. Tessa watched him from a distance, trying not to let her gaze linger. Brooke noticed and elbowed her. "Oh my God," she whispered, a wicked grin spreading across her face. "Did you know he was going to be here?" Tessa's cheeks burned. "Of course not," she said, a little too defensively. Brooke raised an eyebrow. "Uh-huh." Then she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You should go say hi. Or better yet, we could all join their group." Tessa's eyes widened. "Absolutely not." But Brooke was already moving, waving over at Liam and his friends. "Hey boys, room for more?" she called out. Tessa wanted to die on the spot. She watched in horror as Liam turned, his eyes locking onto hers. For a second, his expression was unreadable, but then he smiled, a slow, lazy grin that made her heart skip a beat. "Well, well," he drawled, making his way over to their table. "If it isn't the Ice Queen herself, out in the wild. Never thought I'd see the day." Tessa forced a glare, though it was half-hearted. "Don't you have enough bruises from practice without asking for more?" Liam chuckled, his eyes glinting with amusement. "I'm willing to risk it." He gestured to his group. "Come on, join us. We won't bite. Hard." Brooke grabbed Tessa's arm, giving her no chance to refuse. Within minutes, the two groups had merged, laughter and conversation blending together. Tessa found herself sitting next to Liam, their shoulders occasionally brushing in a way that sent shivers down her spine. She tried to focus on the conversation, but it was hard when he was so close. "So," Liam said, leaning in so she could hear him over the music, "you actually know how to have fun outside of the rink?" Tessa rolled her eyes. "Shocking, isn't it?" He chuckled, his gaze softening. "I'm glad you came. You look happy." The genuine note in his voice caught her off guard, and for a moment, she forgot how to breathe. Was he really looking at her like that, with something like tenderness in his eyes? She tried to brush it off, but the flutter in her chest refused to be ignored. "Well, don't get used to it," she said, though the smile on her lips betrayed her. He didn't reply, just kept looking at her, his expression growing more serious. "You know," he started, his voice dropping to a tone only she could hear. "We make a good team. On the ice, I mean." Tessa swallowed, her mouth suddenly dry. "Yeah," she agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. "We do." For a moment, the noise and chaos of the bar faded away, and it was just the two of them. Tessa could feel the weight of his gaze, the way his eyes searched hers as if he were trying to figure her out. It was dizzying, the way he made her feel, confused and exhilarated all at once. But before either of them could say anything else, one of Liam's teammates interrupted, slapping him on the back. "Come on, Hayes, shot's time." Liam's spell broke, and he was pulled away, but not before giving Tessa a lingering look that left her heart pounding. Brooke slid back into the seat beside her, her eyes alight with mischief. "Well, that was interesting." Tessa groaned, burying her face in her hands. "I can't believe you did that." "Oh, please," Brooke said, grinning. "You're welcome. You two are so obviously into each other, it's painful." Tessa didn't respond. She couldn't, not when her mind was still reeling from the way Liam had looked at her, as if he was starting to see something more than just a rival. The night wore on, the energy in the bar only growing as people crowded the dance floor. Tessa found herself swept up in the fun, even if she still felt like an outsider. She was talking with Brooke when Liam appeared again, this time holding 2 drinks. He handed one to her with a mischievous grin. "Peace offering," he said, "for dragging you into this." Tessa took the drink, eyeing him suspiciously. "What's in it?" He laughed. "Relax. It's just a simple vodka soda. Or do you think I'd poison you?" "With you? Who knows?" she quipped, but she took a sip anyway. They stood there for a moment, the playful banter giving way to something quieter. Tessa found herself studying his face, the strong line of his jaw, the way his dark lashes framed those annoyingly beautiful eyes. He was watching her too, and the air between them felt heavy, charged with something she couldn't name. "Hey," he said softly, his voice serious now. "Can we talk?" Her heart skipped. "About what?" "About this." He gestured between them. "Whatever it is that's happening." Tessa's mouth went dry. She knew exactly what he meant, but she wasn't ready to admit it, not even to herself. "There's nothing happening," she said, a little too quickly. Liam frowned, his eyes searching hers. "Really?" "Because I don't think that's true." Her breath caught, and she suddenly felt trapped, like a deer in headlights. But before she could respond, someone jostled her from behind, spilling her drink all over the front of her sweater. She gasped, the cold liquid soaking into the fabric. "Shit!" she exclaimed, grabbing a handful of napkins. Liam immediately sprang into action, grabbing more napkins and helping her clean up. "Here," he said, his voice tight with concern. "Let me." "I'm fine," she said, but her voice shook. Frustrated, and she hated that she couldn't get a grip on her feelings around him. She needed space, needed air. Before he could say anything else, she spun around and made her way to the bathroom, pushing through the crowd. Once inside, she leaned against the sink, trying to calm her racing heart. What was she doing? Why did he make her feel so off balance? The door opened and Brooke slipped in, her expression a mix of concern and excitement. "What happened? 1 minute you're flirting with Liam and the next you're running away." Tessa glared at her through the mirror. "I'm not flirting." Brooke folded her arms. "Oh, please, it's obvious there's something going on between you two. Why won't you just admit it?" Tessa sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Because I can't. I can't afford to get distracted. Skating is everything to me, Brooke. I've worked too hard to let anything or anyone get in the way." Brooke's expression softened. "I get that. But maybe you're allowed to have both. Skating and a life outside of it?" Tessa shook her head. "I don't know." Brooke gave her a sympathetic smile. "Just think about it, okay? And maybe give Liam a chance. He's not as bad as you think." Tessa didn't reply, but she couldn't deny the truth in Brooke's words. She dried her sweater as best she could and steeled herself to go back out there, hoping she could keep her emotions in check. When she returned to the bar, she found Liam waiting for her, his expression a mix of concern and hope. He looked almost vulnerable, and it did something to her heart. "Hey," he said quietly, "you okay?" Tessa nodded, feeling something inside her soften. "Yeah, sorry for running off like that." He rubbed the back of his neck, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Listen, if I'm making things complicated for you, just say the word. I don't want to screw up our partnership." Tessa hesitated, torn between the desire to keep things professional and the growing feelings she couldn't deny. "You're not," she said, her voice trembling. "I just don't know how to handle this." Liam took a step closer, his gaze intense. "You don't have to handle it alone. Whatever this is, we can figure it out together, if you want." Tessa's breath caught, and for a moment she wanted to believe him, wanted to let herself fall, but the fear of losing everything she'd worked for held her back. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice breaking. Liam's eyes searched hers, and she could see the disappointment there. But he nodded, stepping back. "Okay," he said, "I'll give you space, but I'm here if you ever change your mind." He walked away, leaving Tessa feeling more confused than ever. She watched him go, her heart aching, and wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. The following morning, Tessa arrived at the rink before dawn. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon, casting a pale, cold light over the ice. The rink was eerily quiet, a sanctuary where she could lose herself in practice and avoid thinking about anything else, especially Liam. She tied her skates and stepped onto the ice, taking a deep breath as she began her warm-up routine. The familiar rhythm of skating soothed her, the cool wind brushing against her cheeks, the sound of her blades cutting through the silence. Here she was in control, here she knew who she was. But as she moved into her jumps and spins, she couldn't escape the thoughts racing through her mind. Liam's words from the night before echoed in her ears. "Whatever this is, we can figure it out together. If you want." The way he'd looked at her, so open and vulnerable, had left a mark she couldn't erase. She hated how complicated everything felt, how torn she was between her dreams and the unfamiliar emotions that he stirred within her. Frustrated, Tessa attempted a triple loop, but she faltered, her landing shaky. She cursed under her breath, circling back to try again. This was why she needed to keep her focus. She couldn't let anything or anyone interfere with her skating. Having trouble, Ice Queen? Tessa nearly stumbled at the familiar voice. She turned to see Liam standing at the edge of the rink, his hockey gear slung over his shoulder. His hair was tousled from sleep, and there was a shadow of fatigue under his eyes. But he still managed to look maddeningly handsome. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. He shrugged, his lips quirking into a half-smile. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd get in some early practice. What about you?" Tessa's grip on her emotions slipped, and she let out a sigh. "Same. I needed clarity." Liam's expression softened. "And did you find it?" She looked down at the ice, her heart pounding. "Not really." He stepped closer, his skates crunching softly as he joined her on the ice. "Mind if I practice with you?" he asked, his voice gentle. Tessa hesitated. Part of her wanted to say no, to keep the wall between them intact. But another part of her, the part that had felt so alone in her struggles, craved his presence. Finally, she nodded. They skated together in silence, the only sounds the whisper of their blades and the occasional creak of the rink's old boards. It felt strangely intimate, sharing the ice with him like this, as if they were the only two people in the world. Liam practiced his skating drills, and Tessa focused on perfecting her jumps, but every time she glanced over at him, her heart gave a little lurch. After a while, Liam stopped and leaned on his hockey stick, watching her with an intensity that made her shiver. "You're amazing, you know that?" he said, his voice filled with admiration. Tessa paused mid-glide, her cheeks flushing. "I'm just doing what I've always done." He shook his head. "No, it's more than that, the way you move. It's like you were born for this." She looked at him, her heart swelling at the sincerity in his voice. No one had ever made her feel so seen, so understood. "Thank you," she whispered. They stood there, a fragile truce between them, until Liam broke the silence. "Tessa." "About last night," he began, his voice hesitant. "I meant what I said. I get that you have your dreams, your goals, and I respect that. But you don't have to shut everything else out." Tessa's throat tightened. "It's not that simple. Skating is everything to me. If I let myself get distracted, I could lose everything." Liam's eyes darkened with something she couldn't quite decipher. "And what if there's a way to have both? Skating and whatever this is between us?" She swallowed hard, the vulnerability in his voice striking a chord deep within her. But before she could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the rink, breaking the moment. Coach Andrews, the hockey coach, strode in, his booming voice cutting through the air. "Hayes, what are you doing out here? We've got a morning practice to prepare for." Liam sighed, his expression turning resigned. "Coming, coach," he called. He turned back to Tessa, his gaze lingering. "Think about what I said," he murmured, before skating away to join his team. Tessa watched him go, her heart aching with a longing she didn't know how to handle. She wanted to believe him, to trust that there was a way to balance it all, but the fear of failure held her back. And yet, she couldn't deny that he was slowly, inevitably, becoming a part of her world. Over the next week, the tension between Tessa and Liam only grew. They continued to practice their routine together, their movements synchronized and beautiful, but the undercurrent of unspoken feelings made every interaction charged. Their friends noticed too. Brooke kept giving Tessa knowing looks, while Liam's teammates teased him relentlessly. But neither Tessa nor Liam addressed the elephant in the room, both too afraid to make the first move. Then came a day that tested them both to their limits. Tessa was running late for practice, her nerves already frayed from a grueling morning workout. When she arrived at the rink, she found the hockey players and figure skaters in the middle of yet another argument. Voices were raised, tempers flaring, and the air was thick with tension. "What's going on?" Tessa demanded, pushing her way through the crowd. Brooke turned to her, her face flushed with anger. "They're saying we're hogging the ice time again," she spat. "We have just as much right to be here as they do." One of the hockey players, a broad-shouldered guy named Jake, crossed his arms. "Yeah, but we have a game coming up, and we need the practice more than you do," he shot back. Tessa's hands clenched into fists, but before she could say anything, Liam stepped forward, his jaw tight. "Enough," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. He looked at both groups, his gaze steely. "We're supposed to be working together, remember?" Or did you all forget that? The crowd fell silent, and Tessa's heart squeezed at the sight of Liam standing up for her. But the tension still lingered, and she knew it wouldn't be so easily resolved. Coach Davis, the figure skating coach, finally intervened. "We'll work out a new schedule," she said, her voice firm. "But until then, everyone needs to respect each other's practice times. Understood?" There were a few grumbles, but the crowd slowly began to disperse. Tessa let out a shaky breath, the stress of the confrontation weighing heavily on her. Liam caught her eye, and for a moment, it was just the two of them again. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, though she felt anything but okay. "Yeah, thanks for stepping in." He offered her a small, tired smile. "Always." They went back to practice, but the earlier argument had rattled Tessa more than she wanted to admit. As she worked on their routine, her movements felt off, her usually graceful steps stumbling. Her frustration grew with every mistake, until finally, she let out a cry of anger and skated to the boards, slamming her fists against the plexiglass. Liam skated over, concern etched on his face. "Tessa, what's wrong?" She whirled around, her eyes blazing. "Everything! I can't get it right, and I'm so tired of fighting for every second on the ice. And—" her voice cracked, and she turned away, feeling tears prickle at the corners of her eyes. Liam reached out, gently touching her shoulder. "Hey," he said softly, "you don't have to carry all of this alone." Tessa squeezed her eyes shut, the weight of her stress and fear pressing down on her. "I don't know how to do anything else," she whispered. "Skating is all I have." Liam's grip tightened, and he moved to stand in front of her, forcing her to meet his gaze. "No, it's not," he said, his voice fierce. "You have people who care about you, Brooke, your teammates, and me. You're not alone, Tessa." Her breath caught at the intensity in his eyes, and for a moment, the walls she'd built around herself began to crumble. But the fear was still there, gnawing at her, and she didn't know if she was ready to let him in. Later that evening, Tessa found herself sitting in the empty bleachers, watching the hockey players finish their practice. The rink was dimly lit, the only sound the slap of sticks against the puck and the scrape of skates on ice. She hadn't meant to stay, but something about the stillness of the rink comforted her. Liam skated over, his helmet tucked under his arm, his face glistening with sweat. He looked tired but determined, and Tessa felt a pang of guilt for snapping at him earlier. "Hey," he said, climbing into the bleachers to sit beside her. "You're still here." She offered a small apologetic smile. "I needed some time to think." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Me too." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, Tessa turned to him, her heart pounding. "Why do you care so much?" she asked, her voice trembling. "About me, about us working together. Why?" Liam looked at her, his blue eyes deep and sincere. "Because I see how hard you work," he said. "I see how much you love skating, how much you're willing to sacrifice for it. And because—" he hesitated, his voice dropping. "Because I care about you, Tessa. More than I should." Her breath caught, and for a moment she couldn't speak. The vulnerability in his voice, the raw honesty, left her feeling exposed and terrified. But beneath the fear, there was something else. Hope. "Liam," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm scared." He reached out, his hand warm and steady as it covered hers. "Me too," he admitted. "But maybe we can be scared together." Tessa's heart raced, and she found herself leaning toward him, her walls crumbling at last. His eyes searched hers, and when he leaned in, their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and electric, a spark that set her heart on fire. For the first time in a long while, Tessa felt like she could breathe. Like maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to have both her dreams and the love she never knew she needed. The kiss lingered, a slow dance of emotions they had both kept buried for far too long. When Tessa and Liam finally pulled away, the world around them seemed different, quieter, as if holding its breath for whatever would come next. Tessa's cheeks flushed as she pulled back slightly, looking down at their still clasped hands. Liam's thumb brushed across her knuckles, sending shivers down her spine. "I've wanted to do that for a while," he confessed, a sheepish but hopeful smile playing on his lips. Tessa couldn't help but smile back. though her mind was already swirling with conflicting thoughts. "Liam, what happens now?" she asked softly, the reality of their complicated situation pressing against the fragile bubble they had created. His smile dimmed slightly, but his grip on her hand stayed firm. "We take it one step at a time," he said, his voice steady. "We don't have to have all the answers right now." Tessa wanted to believe him, wanted to hold on to the feeling of lightness his words brought, but a small part of her, the part that had been let down before, still whispered doubts. She bit her lip, nodding even as worry twisted in her chest. "Okay," she said, her voice almost too quiet. They stayed there for a moment longer, soaking in the warmth of each other's presence before reality intruded. The other hockey players were beginning to file off the ice, laughing and teasing each other as they headed toward the locker room. A few of them shot curious glances at Liam and Tessa, but no one approached. Liam stood up, still holding Tessa's hand as he helped her to her feet. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "Coach Andrews will have my head if I'm late for the post-practice meeting." Tessa nodded, her fingers tingling where they touched his. "Right, and I should get some rest." He hesitated, his expression torn. "Tessa, are you sure you're okay?" Concern in his eyes. "Yeah," she said, a smile tugging at her lips. "I will be." With a lingering look, Liam finally let go of her hand and jogged off toward the locker room. Tessa watched him go, her heart still racing. She knew things wouldn't be easy from here on out, but for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope. The next day at practice, Tessa found it hard to concentrate. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still feel Liam's lips on hers, the warmth of his touch seeping into her skin. She was so distracted that she stumbled over a simple spin, nearly crashing into Brooke, who was practicing nearby. "Whoa there!" Brooke exclaimed, grabbing Tessa's arm to steady her. "You okay?" Tessa flushed, embarrassed. "Yeah, sorry, I guess I'm a little off today." Brooke raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying it. "A little? You've been skating like you're lost in space." Her eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Wait a minute. Did something happen last night?" Tessa's face turned even redder, and she glanced around to make sure no one else was listening. "Can we not talk about it here?" she whispered. Brooke's eyes widened, a delighted grin spreading across her face. "Oh my God, something did happen. Spill. Now." Tessa sighed, knowing there was no escaping her friend's relentless curiosity. "Fine," she relented, pulling Brooke over to the corner of the rink. "Liam and we kissed." Brooke's jaw dropped. "Are you serious? Liam Hayes kissed you? On purpose?" Tessa rolled her eyes. "Yes, on purpose. It was complicated," Brooke squealed, clapping her hands together. "Complicated or not, that's huge. How are you feeling about it?" Tessa hesitated, her earlier worries resurfacing. "I don't know," she admitted. "It felt amazing, but I'm scared. We're both so focused on our sports, and if things go wrong, it could ruin everything." Brooke's smile softened into something more understanding. "Tessa, you've been pushing yourself so hard for so long. Maybe it's okay to let someone in. You deserve to be happy too." The sincerity in Brooke's voice brought tears to Tessa's eyes, but she blinked them away, nodding. "Thanks," she whispered. "I just hope I'm not making a huge mistake." As the week went on, the anticipation for the upcoming hockey game grew. The arena was buzzing with excitement, and both the hockey team and the figure skaters felt the pressure. For Liam, the game represented an important opportunity to prove himself, especially with college scouts in the audience. For Tessa, it meant that her performances would be watched by more people, including potential sponsors. On the morning of the game, Tessa arrived at the rink early to squeeze in a final practice session. The air felt electric with nervous energy, and she could hear the distant echo of the hockey players warming up. She tried to block out everything else, focusing on the movements that had become second nature, the leap, the spin, the controlled landing. But then she heard footsteps approaching, and looked up to see Liam standing by the boards, his helmet in hand and his hockey jersey hanging loose around his frame. He looked more nervous than she'd ever seen him. "Tessa," he called, his voice tinged with urgency. She skated over, her heart thudding in her chest. "Hey, shouldn't you be warming up?" He nodded, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, but I wanted to see you first." Tessa's chest tightened. "What's wrong?" He hesitated, as if debating whether to tell her. "It's stupid," he finally said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "I just needed to hear you say I'm not going to screw this up." Tessa's eyes softened, and she reached out to touch his arm. "You're not going to screw this up," she said firmly. "You're one of the best players I've ever seen, Liam. You've got this." His smile grew, and he covered her hand with his. "Thanks. I don't know what I'd do without you." Before Tessa could respond, a whistle blew from across the rink, signaling the start of the hockey team's final warm-up. Liam squeezed her hand one last time before jogging off, leaving Tessa feeling both comforted and deeply, inescapably tied to him. The arena was packed with fans, the stands vibrating with excitement as the hockey game began. Tessa sat with the other figure skaters, her nerves fraying with every slap of the puck and shout of the crowd. She could see Liam on the ice, his movements fluid and powerful as he played. But she could also see the weight he was carrying, the expectations, the pressure, the fear of failing. The game was brutal. The opposing team was strong, their defense impenetrable, and tensions were running high. By the third period, the score was tied, and the outcome of the game rested on a knife's edge. Every time Liam got the puck, Tessa found herself holding her breath, silently willing him to succeed. Then, with only a minute left on the clock, Liam broke through the defense and charged toward the goal. The arena erupted in chaos, the crowd on its feet, and Tessa's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. Liam dodged one defender, then another, his movements swift and sure, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. He took the shot. The puck sailed through the air, spinning toward the goal, and then, with a resounding clang, it hit the crossbar and bounced away. The crowd let out a collective groan, and Liam's shoulders slumped in defeat. The opposing team gained control of the puck, and within seconds, they scored, sealing the game. Tessa's heart shattered as she watched Liam skate off the ice, his head bowed. The game was over, and they had lost. The disappointment in the arena was palpable, and Tessa could feel Liam's anguish as if it were her own. After the game, Tessa found Liam sitting alone in the empty locker room, still in his hockey gear. His helmet lay discarded on the bench beside him, and his hands were buried in his hair. The sight of him, so broken, made Tessa's chest ache. "Liam?" she called softly. He didn't look up, his voice hoarse. "I blew it." Tessa walked over, her footsteps echoing in the silent room. "You didn't blow it," she said, her voice gentle. "You played your heart out. That's what matters." He let out a bitter laugh. "Tell that to the scouts, or to my teammates." Tessa knelt in front of him, reaching out to touch his face. "Hey," she said, her voice firm, "look at me." Reluctantly, he lifted his head, and she could see the pain in his eyes, the self-doubt that he was trying so hard to hide. Her heart broke for him, but she refused to let him wallow in despair. "You're more than one game," she told him. "You're more than one missed shot. You're the guy who never gives up, who fights for what he wants. And I believe in you." Liam stared at her, his blue eyes searching hers, and for a moment it felt like the world had narrowed down to just the two of them. Then, slowly, he reached out and pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the only thing keeping him from falling apart. "I don't deserve you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Tessa clung to him, her own tears threatening to spill. "Maybe not," she said, a teasing smile breaking through her sadness. "But you're stuck with me anyway." Liam let out a shaky laugh, and the sound was like a balm to her heart. They stayed like that, wrapped in each other's arms, finding comfort in the knowledge that even in their darkest moments, they weren't alone. The days following the heartbreaking loss were some of the most difficult Tessa and Liam had faced. The entire school seemed to be mourning the defeat, and the disappointment in the air was thick enough to taste. Everywhere Liam went, he felt the weight of expectation and judgment from his classmates and teammates, the whispers in the hallways, the sympathetic but pitying looks, all of it gnawed at him. Tessa, too, felt the impact of the game in her own way. Her routine suddenly seemed trivial compared to the anguish she saw in Liam's eyes, and it was hard to find joy in skating when she knew he was suffering, but she refused to let him drown in his sorrow. She visited him daily, checking in, coaxing him to talk, and bringing small comforts, a cup of coffee, a favorite snack, a shared memory that made him smile. One cold afternoon, Tessa found Liam sitting by the frozen pond near campus, bundled in his jacket and staring out over the ice. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the snow-dusted landscape. Tessa hesitated for a moment, watching him, before making her way over and sitting beside him. "Hey," she said quietly. Liam glanced at her, his face shadowed with exhaustion. "Hey." They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the rustle of the wind and the occasional distant call of a bird. Tessa pulled her knees to her chest, resting her chin on them. "It's beautiful out here," she said, her breath forming small puffs in the frigid air. Liam nodded, his gaze distant. "Yeah. I used to come here a lot when I was younger. My dad taught me how to skate on this pond." Tessa's heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice. She knew how much pressure he felt, how desperately he wanted to make his family proud. Reaching out, she gently covered his gloved hand with hers. "You know," she said, "your dad is proud of you, win or lose." Liam's jaw clenched, and he looked away, his shoulders tense. I wanted to be enough," he admitted, his voice cracking. "For him, for the team, for everyone who's ever believed in me." Tessa's fingers tightened around his. "You are enough," she whispered. "You've always been enough. You don't have to prove anything to anyone." For a moment, Liam didn't move. Then he turned to her, his blue eyes shining with unshed tears. "How do you always know what to say?" he asked, his voice rough. Tessa smiled, though her own eyes were damp. "Because I know what it feels like to doubt myself, to feel like I have to be perfect or I'll lose everything. But I'm learning that it's okay to be human, to make mistakes." He stared at her, his expression softening, and something inside him seemed to shift. Slowly, he reached out and cupped her face, his touch gentle. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Tessa," he murmured. Her heart skipped a beat, and she leaned into his touch, savoring the warmth of his palm. "Good thing you'll never have to find out," she teased, her voice trembling with emotion. Liam's lips curved into a small, genuine smile, and he closed the distance between them, pressing his forehead to hers. They stayed like that, two souls finding solace in each other, until the sky darkened and the stars began to twinkle above. With renewed determination, Liam threw himself into training. The sting of defeat still lingered, but he refused to let it define him. His teammates, who had been distant at first, gradually rallied around him, and the bond they shared as a team grew stronger through the shared experience of loss. They practiced harder, pushing each other, and the locker room began to feel like a place of unity rather than tension. Tessa watched Liam's progress with pride, but she had her own battles to face. The regional figure skating competition was only weeks away, and her coach was pushing her to perfect a difficult new routine. The program was ambitious, full of intricate footwork and daring jumps, and Tessa knew that executing it flawlessly could make or break her future in the sport. One evening, after a grueling practice session, Tessa found herself collapsing onto the bench in the locker room, her body aching. Her coach had been relentless, pointing out every mistake and making her repeat sections of her routine until her muscles felt like jelly. She buried her face in her hands, fighting the tears of frustration that burned in her eyes. "Tough day?" came a familiar voice. Tessa looked up to see Liam standing in the doorway, still in his hockey gear, but with his helmet tucked under his arm. His hair was damp with sweat, and there was a bruise forming on his jaw from a rough practice, but his smile was warm. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Yeah, coach is convinced I'm not ready for regionals." Liam frowned, setting his helmet down and coming over to sit beside her. "That's ridiculous. You're one of the most talented skaters I've ever seen." Tessa managed a small, tired smile. "You're biased." "Maybe," he said, bumping her shoulder lightly. "But I've also seen you work your ass off every day. You deserve to be there, Tessa." His words warmed her heart, but the doubt still lingered. I'm scared I'll mess up," she admitted. "What if I'm not good enough?" Liam's expression softened, and he took her hand in his. "Then you'll get back up and keep going," he said simply. "Just like I did after the game. We don't give up, remember?" Tessa's eyes met his, and for a moment, the weight of her fears felt a little lighter. "Yeah," she said, squeezing his hand. "We don't give up." The final practices before regionals and the next big hockey game were a whirlwind of sweat, bruises, and late-night pep talks. Tessa and Liam became each other's strongest supporters, finding small ways to lift each other up even when exhaustion threatened to pull them down. Liam would leave her encouraging notes in her locker, and Tessa would sneak snacks into his gym bag with silly doodles to make him laugh. One afternoon, as Tessa was practicing her routine, she heard the door to the rink creak open. She glanced up to see Liam leaning against the boards, watching her with a mixture of awe and admiration. He often stopped by to watch her skate, and it had become a comforting routine for both of them. "Hey, no pressure," he called with a grin, "but I think you're about to nail that triple loop." Tessa laughed, the sound echoing across the empty rink. "You think so?" He nodded, his eyes twinkling. "I have total faith in you." Taking a deep breath, Tessa skated to the center of the rink and prepared for the jump. She could feel the tension in her muscles, the way her heart raced as she bent her knees and launched herself into the air. For a split second, everything felt weightless, and then she landed, the ice scraping beneath her blades as she stuck the landing perfectly. Liam whooped, clapping his hands. "Yes, that was amazing!" Tessa's face broke into a wide grin, and she skated over to where he stood, her heart still pounding. "See? Told you you're biased," she teased. He reached over the boards and took her hands, his smile softening. "Maybe I am," he said, "but I'd bet on you any day." Tessa felt her cheeks warm, and for a moment, all the stress and pressure melted away. With Liam by her side, she felt like she could take on the world. The night before the regional competition, Tessa lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as nerves churned in her stomach, casting shadows across her room, and she couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over her. Her phone buzzed on her nightstand, and she reached over to see a text from Liam. "Can't sleep either?" Smiling, she typed back, "Nope. Too nervous." A moment later, her phone buzzed again. "Want to go for a walk?" Tessa hesitated, but the thought of being alone with her worries all night was too much to bear. "Meet me outside in 5, she replied. Throwing on a hoodie and a pair of boots, she slipped out of the house and found Liam waiting for her under the street lamp, his breath visible in the cold air. He had his hands shoved into his pockets, and when he saw her, he smiled, a warm, familiar smile that made her feel instantly better. "Hey," he said, his voice gentle. "Hey," she replied, walking up to him. "Thanks for this." He shrugged, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "What are best friends?" Together, they wandered through the quiet neighborhood, their footsteps crunching in the snow. The conversation flowed easily, shifting from silly memories to deep confessions, and for a while, Tessa forgot all about her fears. When they reached the small park at the end of the street, they stopped by the swings, and Liam gestured for her to sit. She did, and he gently pushed her, the swing creaking as it moved back and forth. "Remember when we were kids and you dared me to jump off the swings?" he asked, his voice filled with nostalgia. Tessa laughed, the memory warming her heart. "Yeah, and you landed flat on your face. I thought you'd never forgive me." He chuckled, the sound echoing through the empty park. "But I did. Because I was in love with you even then." Tessa's laughter faded, and she twisted around to look at him, her eyes wide. "You? What?" Liam's smile softened, and he stepped closer, his hands gently stopping the swing. "I've been in love with you for as long as I can remember, Tessa," he confessed, his voice raw and sincere. "I tried to hide it, tried to push it away, but it's always been there." Tessa's heart raced, her breath catching in her throat. "Liam." He took her hands, his eyes searching hers. "I know the timing is crazy, and we both have so much going on, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel this way. You mean everything to me." Tears welled in Tessa's eyes, and she stood up, her hands trembling in his. "I love you too," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I think I always have." Liam's face lit up with relief and joy, and before she could say another word, he cupped her face and kissed her. The world fell away, and for that perfect moment, it was just the two of them, standing in the snow under the stars, their hearts beating in time. When they finally pulled away, both of them were breathless, and Tessa couldn't help but laugh, happiness bubbling up inside her. "You have the worst timing, you know that?" she teased. Liam grinned, his forehead resting against hers. Yeah, but it's our timing. And I wouldn't change it for the world. The morning of the regional competition arrived with a sky that looked heavy and pale, the threat of snow lingering in the clouds. Tessa woke with a heart pounding in anticipation, her mind immediately jumping to the routine she had spent months perfecting. She went through her usual pre-competition rituals, sipping tea, doing a few stretches to loosen up, and triple-checking her skating gear. Her phone buzzed with a stream of encouraging texts from friends and her coach, but the one that made her smile the most was from Liam. "You've got this, Tess." I'll be in the front row, cheering louder than anyone. Knowing Liam would be there filled her with a strange mix of calm and electricity. She got dressed in her skating costume, a shimmering blue dress that reminded her of a winter sky, and carefully did her makeup, focusing on each step to keep herself centered. Her parents drove her to the rink, offering words of encouragement that made her heart feel fuller and heavier at the same time. She could tell how proud they were, how much they wanted to see her succeed, and that knowledge fueled her determination. When they arrived, Tessa stepped into the buzzing chaos of the competition arena, her senses immediately assaulted by the bright lights and the sound of skates scraping across the ice. The air was thick with nervous energy. Skaters warmed up in clusters, coaches barked last-minute instructions, and judges conferred over their clipboards. Tessa made her way to the locker room, her skates clutched in her hands, and found a quiet corner where she could prepare. Her hands trembled as she laced up her boots, but she took deep, steadying breaths, reminding herself of everything she had worked for. Just as she finished tightening the last lace, a familiar voice called her name. "Tessa!" She looked up to see Liam standing in the doorway, his hockey jacket slung over his shoulders and a grin that lit up his whole face. Despite the tension in the room, seeing him felt like coming up for air after being underwater. "You're really here," she said, her voice catching with a mixture of relief and joy. "Of course I am," he replied, stepping inside and walking over to her. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." She rose from the bench, her heart beating a little steadier now that he was near. "You must think I'm crazy for being this nervous," she admitted, her voice small. Liam's smile softened, and he took her hands in his touch warm and steady. "You're not crazy," he said. "You care. That's what makes you amazing. But you're going to be incredible out there, Tessa. I believe in you." Tessa swallowed hard, her vision blurring with sudden tears. "How do you always know what to say?" she whispered. He gently cupped her face, his thumb brushing a stray tear from her cheek. "Because I know you," he said. "I've watched you work so hard, put everything you have into this, and no matter what happens today, you're already a champion to me." Tessa felt the weight of his words settle around her heart, grounding her. She wrapped her arms around him, holding on tightly, and took a deep breath. When she finally pulled away, she felt stronger, more certain. "Thank you," she said softly. He winked, stepping back and giving her a mock salute. "Go out there and show them who you are." With his support echoing in her mind, Tessa made her way to the ice, her skates gliding across the frozen surface as she did a few warm-up laps. The crowd was a blur of faces and noise, but she spotted Liam in the front row, waving a handmade sign that said, "Go, Tessa!" in big, bold letters. He stood out like a beacon, and she smiled, feeling her courage swell. The announcer called her name, and the crowd hushed, the energy in the arena shifting to a heightened anticipation. Tessa skated to the center of the rink, her heart racing, and took her opening pose. The music began, a hauntingly beautiful melody that matched the theme of her routine, strength through vulnerability. Every move had to be perfect, every jump, every spin, every step. As the music swelled, Tessa pushed off, her body moving in perfect harmony with the song. The first jump, a double axel, went off flawlessly. Her blades landed with a smooth, confident scrape, and she felt the rhythm of the routine take over. The crowd was silent, holding its breath as she flowed across the ice, her arms extending in graceful arcs. She nailed a combination spin, her dress fanning out around her like a wave, and then launched into a series of footwork that had taken her weeks to master. She could feel every eye on her, but she didn't let it distract her. She focused on the music, on the feeling of the ice beneath her feet, and on the belief that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Then came the hardest part, the triple loop. She approached the jump, gathering speed, and bent her knees, her entire body coiling like a spring. Her heart seemed to pause as she took off, her skate slicing through the air. For a split second, she felt weightless, suspended in midair, and then she landed. The arena erupted into applause, but Tessa didn't let herself celebrate yet. She kept going, finishing the final sequence of spins and gliding into her closing pose. The music faded, and she held the pose for a heartbeat longer before exhaling, her chest heaving. The crowd rose to its feet, clapping and cheering, and Tessa's vision blurred with tears of relief and pride. She had done it. She had given everything she had, and it had been enough. She skated off the ice, her knees shaking, and was immediately enveloped in her coach's embrace. "That was magnificent," her coach said, her voice choked with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." Tessa barely had time to catch her breath before she saw Liam pushing through the crowd, his face alight with joy. He reached her and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. "You were incredible," he exclaimed, his voice hoarse with excitement. "Tessa, you were perfect." She laughed, her heart soaring, and when he set her down, she kissed him, not caring who was watching. The world had narrowed to just the two of them, and she felt invincible. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Tessa received her scores, high enough to place her near the top, and was swarmed by friends and family offering congratulations. But the best moment came when she and Liam found a quiet corner of the rink. Away from the noise and chaos, they sat on a bench, his arm around her shoulders, and she rested her head against his. "Thank you for being here," she said, her voice soft. "I couldn't have done it without you." Liam kissed her temple, his touch gentle. "I'll always be here," he promised, "no matter what." Tessa closed her eyes, savoring the moment. She knew there were more challenges ahead, more battles to fight, but for now, she was content. She had given her all, and she had someone who believed in her, and that was more than enough. The exhilaration of Tessa's performance lingered long after the competition ended. The days that followed were a whirlwind of congratulations, interviews, and celebrations. Tessa found herself in the spotlight more than ever, her name buzzing around campus and in the local media as people marveled at her grace and skill. It felt surreal, as if she were floating through a dream. But not everything was perfect. As the high of the competition began to fade, Tessa found herself dealing with the pressures of newfound attention and the daunting prospect of the upcoming national qualifiers. Every practice session became a delicate balancing act between maintaining her current skill level and pushing herself harder to perfect her new, more complex routine. Liam was there for her every step of the way. When she felt like she couldn't do another jump or spin, he was the one cheering her on, offering words of encouragement that kept her going. He made her laugh when the stress became overwhelming, and he was there to hold her when exhaustion left her feeling raw and vulnerable. At the same time, Liam was also navigating his own challenges. The hockey season was reaching a crucial point, and every game carried the weight of expectation, not just from his team, but from the university and scouts who were watching him closely. The pressure was immense, and as much as he tried to hide it, Tessa could see how it wore him down. One late night, after a particularly rough hockey practice, Liam found himself sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at his bruised and aching hands. The physical toll of the sport was one thing, but the mental exhaustion was starting to get to him. He wondered if he could really live up to everyone's expectations, or if he was destined to disappoint them. A knock at his door broke him out of his thoughts. He looked up to see Tessa standing there, her hair pulled back in a messy bun and a worried expression on her face. She wore an oversized hoodie and leggings, looking every bit as tired as he felt. "Hey," she said softly, stepping inside. "You left practice early. I wanted to check on you." Liam managed a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Just needed some time to myself," he admitted. "It's a lot." Tessa sat down beside him, her presence warm and comforting. "I know," she said, her voice gentle. "I get it." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes filled with vulnerability. "What if I'm not good enough, Tess? What if I let everyone down?" Her heart ached at the pain in his voice. She reached out and took his hands in hers, her touch light but firm. "You won't," she said, her voice steady, "because you work harder than anyone I know. And even if things don't go the way you want, it doesn't change who you are or how much you've accomplished." Liam's shoulders slumped, and he closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning in it all." Tessa shifted closer, wrapping her arms around him and holding him tightly. "You're not alone," she whispered. "We're in this together, remember? We lift each other up." He held onto her as if she were the only thing keeping him from breaking apart. For a moment, they sat there in the quiet of his dorm room, two people who understood each other's struggles better than anyone else. When Liam finally pulled back, he looked at her with gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you," he said softly, "for being here." Tessa smiled, her fingers brushing a strand of hair from his face. "Always." As winter melted into spring, the demands of school, sports, and their relationship became even more pronounced. The late nights of studying, early morning practices, and constant stream of responsibilities tested their resilience. Yet, through it all, Tessa and Liam leaned on each other. One weekend, Tessa found herself struggling to finish a research paper for one of her toughest classes. She sat at her desk, her eyes burning from staring at her laptop screen for hours. The words had begun to blur together, and she groaned in frustration, rubbing her temples. A knock at her door pulled her out of her misery. She turned to see Liam standing there, a mischievous grin on his face and a paper bag in his hand. "Surprise," he said, stepping inside. "I brought reinforcements." Tessa raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "Reinforcements?" Liam set the bag down on her desk and pulled out a container of steaming hot soup and a package of her favorite cookies. "You've been working too hard," he said. "Figured you could use some fuel." Her heart swelled at the thoughtful gesture, and she couldn't help but smile. "You're a lifesaver," she said, reaching for the soup. The warmth of the container was a welcome comfort, and she inhaled the savory aroma. Liam watched her with a satisfied look, leaning against her desk. "How's the paper coming?" Tessa made a face. "Terribly. I feel like I'm writing in circles." He chuckled, reaching out to rub her shoulder. "You'll figure it out. You always do." They shared the meal together, laughing and talking about everything except the stress weighing them down. For a little while, it felt like time had slowed, and Tessa was grateful for the break. By the time they finished, she felt recharged, ready to tackle her paper once more. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "I needed that." Liam smiled, his eyes full of warmth. "Anytime." As the national qualifiers loomed closer, Tessa's training became even more intense. Her coach demanded perfection, pushing her to her limits. The rink became her second home, and the ice her constant companion. But with the increased pressure came increased self-doubt. One afternoon, after a brutal practice session, Tessa found herself sitting on the edge of the rink, her skates still laced up, tears streaming down her face. She had fallen multiple times during her routine, each mistake feeling like a crushing failure. Her body ached and her spirit felt fractured. Liam arrived just as she wiped at her eyes, trying to compose herself. He approached quietly, sitting beside her and offering her a bottle of water. "Hey," he said, his voice gentle. "Rough day?" Tessa nodded, her throat tight. "I can't get it right," she whispered. "I keep messing up, and I'm so scared that I'm going to blow my chance at nationals." Liam's expression softened, and he reached over to take her hand. "Tess, listen to me. You've been working so hard, and even the best athletes have off days. It doesn't mean you're not ready." Her shoulders slumped, and she leaned into him, seeking comfort. "I feel like I'm falling apart," she admitted. "Like I'm not strong enough to handle this." He wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. "You are strong enough," he insisted, "and I'm here for you, no matter what. We'll get through this together." Tessa closed her eyes, letting his words sink in. She knew that the journey to nationals wouldn't be easy, but with Liam by her side, she felt a glimmer of hope. They sat there for a long time, the ice cold beneath them, but the warmth of their bond keeping them both from breaking. As finals week approached, both Liam and Tessa found themselves stretched to their breaking points. Late-night study sessions became the norm, and their schedules rarely aligned, making it difficult to find time for each other. The strain began to show, and small arguments over trivial things left them both feeling frustrated and misunderstood. One evening, after an exhausting day of classes and practice, Tessa finally snapped. She and Liam had planned to meet up for dinner, but he showed up an hour late, looking worn out and apologetic. "I'm sorry," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Practice ran over, and Coach wouldn't let us leave." Tessa crossed her arms, her exhaustion fueling her irritation. "You could have texted," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "I've been waiting here. And I'm tired too, you know." Liam's expression tightened and he sighed. "I know, and I'm sorry, but I'm doing the best I can, Tess. It's not like I'm slacking off." The tension crackled between them, both of them too worn out to be patient. "It feels like we're always running in opposite directions," Tessa said, her voice breaking. "Like we're drifting apart, and I hate it." Liam's jaw clenched, his own frustration surfacing. "You think I don't feel that too? I hate this just as much as you do, but I don't know how to fix it. We're both under so much pressure." Silence fell, heavy and suffocating, and for a moment it felt as if the distance between them had become insurmountable. Tessa looked down, tears stinging her eyes, and she wondered if love was enough to hold them together when everything else seemed determined to pull them apart. But then Liam stepped forward, his anger melting into something softer. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and cupped her face. "I don't want to lose you," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "I love you, Tessa, and I know this is hard, but we can't let it break us." Tessa's heart cracked open, and she leaned into his touch, her tears spilling over. "I love you too," she whispered. "I'm just scared." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, and they stood there in the quiet of the evening, clinging to each other as if their love was the only thing keeping them from falling apart. The days after their argument were tense, but both Tessa and Liam knew that letting their stress tear them apart would only make things worse. They had a choice to make: let the mounting pressures drive a wedge between them or find a way to support each other better. The following evening, after another grueling day of classes and practice, they decided to meet at their favorite park, the one where Liam had first confessed his love to her under the stars. The air was crisp, the early signs of spring visible in the buds on the trees, and the cool breeze carrying a hint of warmer days to come. Tessa sat on a bench, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea, waiting for Liam. She had spent the afternoon replaying their fight, feeling guilty and uncertain. When she heard his familiar footsteps approaching, she looked up, her heart fluttering. Liam came to a stop in front of her, his face weary but determined. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey," she replied, her voice equally tentative. For a moment they just looked at each other, the silence heavy with everything they hadn't said. Liam sat down beside her, exhaling slowly. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he began, "about how we feel like we're drifting apart. And you're right, this has been one of the hardest stretches we've ever had." Tessa bit her lip, her throat tight. "I don't want to lose what we have," she whispered. "But sometimes it feels like we're fighting an uphill battle, and I don't know if we're winning or just wearing ourselves out." He reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "I know," he said, "but I also know that you're the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I'm not ready to give up on us. I don't care how hard it gets. I'm willing to fight for you, for us." Tessa's eyes filled with tears, and she squeezed his hand. "Me too," she said, her voice shaking. "I love you, Liam. Even when it feels impossible, I love you." A small, hopeful smile broke across his face. "Then let's figure this out," he said. "Let's find ways to make this work, even if it means making sacrifices or leaning on each other more." They spent the next hour talking honestly, sharing their fears and frustrations, but also the dreams that kept them moving forward. They made a pact to communicate better, to carve out time for each other even when it seemed impossible. It wouldn't solve everything overnight, but it was a start, and for the first time in weeks, they both felt a sense of hope. With their renewed commitment to each other, Tessa and Liam began to make small but meaningful changes. They coordinated their schedules as best they could, planning study sessions together, or taking breaks to grab coffee and just talk. It wasn't perfect, and some days still felt like an uphill climb, but they were determined to keep trying. One sunny afternoon, Tessa stood at the edge of the rink, watching as her coach, Isabel, went over the new choreography she had designed for Tessa's national qualifier routine. The routine was bold, full of intricate footwork and jumps that would test Tessa's limits, but she knew that playing it safe wasn't an option if she wanted to stand out. "Ready?" Isabel asked, her sharp eyes assessing Tessa's posture. Tessa nodded, determination setting her jaw. She pushed off the boards and glided onto the ice, feeling the familiar thrill that came with every practice. The routine began with a series of quick turns, her feet slicing through the ice as she built momentum. Her heart raced, but she focused on the rhythm, on the way the music seemed to pulse in her veins. The first jump came and went without a hitch, a double toe loop that she landed cleanly. Confidence surged through her, and she launched into a combination spin, her body moving with precision. Everything was going well until she attempted the triple Lutz, the most difficult element of her routine. She took off, her body twisting in the air, but something went wrong. Her balance shifted just a fraction of an inch, and she came crashing down onto the ice, pain jolting through her knee. The impact left her breathless, and she lay there for a moment, the cold seeping into her bones. Isabel skated over, concern etched on her face. "Tessa, are you okay?" Tessa forced herself to sit up, wincing. Her knee throbbed, but she took a deep breath and nodded. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice shook. "Just slip." Her coach looked unconvinced, but helped her to her feet. "Take a break," Isabel ordered. "We'll try again in a few minutes." Tessa bit back her frustration, gliding to the edge of the rink and sitting down. She rubbed her aching knee, tears of pain and disappointment stinging her eyes. She had to get this routine right. Nationals were only a few weeks away, and she couldn't afford mistakes like this. She closed her eyes, drawing in a deep breath to calm herself, when she felt a presence beside her. Opening her eyes, she turned to see Liam standing there, his hockey bag slung over one shoulder and a concerned frown on his face. "I saw the fall," he said, his voice gentle. "Are you okay?" Tessa managed a shaky smile. "Yeah, just bruised my pride a bit." He set down his bag and knelt beside her, his fingers brushing lightly over her knee. "You're pushing yourself so hard," he murmured. "It's okay to take a break, you know." "I can't," she whispered, her frustration bubbling. "If I mess up at nationals, everything I've worked for will be for nothing." Liam's eyes softened, and he took her hands in his. "You're the strongest person I know, Tess. But even the strongest people need to rest sometimes. You're human, not a machine." His words made something inside her crack, and she let out a small, choked laugh. "You always know what to say, don't you?" He smiled, squeezing her hands. "I try." They sat there in silence for a moment, the tension easing from her shoulders. With Liam by her side, the obstacles didn't feel as insurmountable. She knew the road ahead would still be hard, but she also knew she wasn't alone. As the weeks flew by, the anticipation for nationals became palpable. The rink buzzed with energy, and Tessa's training sessions grew more grueling. Isabel pushed her harder than ever, fine-tuning every detail of her routine until it felt like second nature. Tessa's body ached, but she felt stronger, more confident, and she clung to the hope that all her hard work would pay off. Liam was dealing with his own set of challenges. The hockey playoffs were in full swing, and every game felt like a battle for survival. He spent long hours on the ice, perfecting plays and strategizing with his team, but he never missed an opportunity to check in on Tessa. Their relationship had become a delicate dance of give and take, but they had found a rhythm that worked. One evening, as Tessa prepared to leave the rink, she found Liam waiting for her, a mischievous grin on his face. He held up a pair of tickets, and her eyes widened in surprise. "What's this?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. He handed her the tickets, his grin widening. "A surprise date," he announced. "There's an ice show coming to town, and I figured we could use a night off. No stress, no competitions, just fun." Tessa's heart swelled with affection, and she threw her arms around his neck, laughing. "You're amazing, you know that?" He hugged her back, his laughter mingling with her. "I do my best." The night of the ice show arrived, and Tessa found herself giddy with excitement. They dressed up, Tessa in a flowy dress and Liam in a crisp button-down shirt, and made their way to the arena. The show was a dazzling spectacle, full of acrobatic spins, elegant choreography, and breathtaking jumps that left them both in awe. Sitting beside Liam, Tessa felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in weeks. They held hands, sharing popcorn and whispering about their favorite performances. It was a night full of laughter and wonder, a much-needed reminder of why they loved skating, and each other in the first place. As they left the arena, the cool night air wrapped around them, and Tessa looked up at the stars, her heart full. "Thank you for this," she said, turning to Liam. "I didn't realize how much I needed it." He slipped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "Any time," he said, his voice warm. "We deserve to have moments like this, to remember what makes us happy." Tessa rested her head on his shoulder, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Nationals were coming, and she knew it would be one of the biggest challenges of her life. But she was ready to face it, with Liam by her side. The final stretch before nationals felt like a blur of intense practices, study sessions, and moments of stolen intimacy between Tessa and Liam. The pressure mounted with every passing day, each moment carrying the weight of expectation. Tessa spent nearly all her free time on the ice, perfecting the intricate choreography that Isabel had crafted. Her feet ached, her muscles screamed for rest, but she refused to slow down. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and bathed the rink in a soft orange glow, Tessa stood in the center of the ice. Isabel watched from the boards, her sharp eyes following Tessa's every movement. "Again," Isabel called, her voice firm but not unkind. From the top, "Your footwork needs to be tighter in the opening sequence." Tessa took a deep breath, pushing away her exhaustion. She nodded, gliding backward and positioning herself. The music swelled, filling the rink, and she began her routine once more. Her skates carved graceful arcs into the ice, her arms flowing in perfect synchronization with the rhythm. The first jump, a double axel, felt effortless, and she landed it with a smooth glide. The footwork sequence came next, and she focused intently on her precision, each movement deliberate. Her body felt like a well-oiled machine, moving with grace and power. But as she approached the triple Lutz, the jump that had haunted her for weeks, doubt crept into her mind. She gathered speed, bending her knees, and launched into the jump. For a brief moment, she felt weightless, her body suspended in the air. But just as she began to rotate, her focus wavered, and she came crashing down onto the ice, the impact jarring through her body. A frustrated cry escaped her lips, and she slammed her fists onto the ice, tears stinging her eyes. Isabel skated over, her expression a mix of disappointment and concern. "Tessa," Isabel said gently, kneeling beside her. "You're exhausted. Your form is suffering because of it." Tessa looked up at her coach, her vision blurred by tears. "I can't afford to be tired," she whispered. "Nationals are so close, and I still can't land that jump consistently." Isabel's gaze softened. She placed a comforting hand on Tessa's shoulder. "Pushing yourself to the breaking point won't help you succeed," she said. "Sometimes rest is as important as training. You need to trust that your body will remember everything you've worked for." Tessa wanted to argue, to insist that she needed more practice, but the truth was undeniable. Her body was failing her because she hadn't given it a chance to recover. With a reluctant nod, she stood up, wincing at the ache in her knee. "Take the evening off," Isabel instructed. "No skating, no thinking about. Just rest and let your mind reset." Tessa sighed, knowing her coach was right. "Okay," she said, her voice heavy with defeat. "I'll try." Isabel gave her a small, encouraging smile. "You've got this, Tessa. Believe in yourself." Taking Isabel's advice was harder than Tessa expected. That evening, she found herself pacing her dorm room, restless and anxious. Her mind buzzed with worry, and the idea of resting felt foreign, almost wrong. Just as she was about to cave and head back to the rink, her phone buzzed with a text from Liam. "Meet me at the lake in 10 minutes. Trust me." Tessa frowned at the message but couldn't help smiling. Liam had a way of knowing when she needed a distraction, and she was grateful for it. She changed into a warm sweater and grabbed her jacket, heading out into the crisp night air. The walk to the lake was peaceful, the moon casting a silver glow over the campus. When she arrived, she found Liam waiting for her on the shore, a small picnic spread laid out on a blanket. He wore a beanie and a soft smile, his hands tucked into his pockets. "What's all this?" Tessa asked, her curiosity piqued. Liam grinned, gesturing to the picnic. "A distraction," he said. "You've been working yourself to the bone, and I figured you could use a night to just be. No skating, no stress, just us." Tessa's heart swelled, and she felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "You're too good to me," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He shrugged, his eyes twinkling. "Someone's gotta take care of you when you forget to take care of yourself." They sat down together, and Tessa let herself relax for the first time in days. Liam had packed an assortment of her favorite snacks, from chocolate-covered strawberries to a thermos of hot cocoa. They ate, laughed, and talked about everything except the competitions that loomed over them. At one point, Liam pulled out his phone and began playing a soft, acoustic play. He stood up, extending his hand to Tessa with a playful grin. "Dance with me?" She raised an eyebrow, laughing. "Here? In the middle of the night?" "Why not?" he challenged, his eyes full of mischief. "No one's around. Besides, I've seen you do triple axels on ice skates. Surely a little dancing on solid ground isn't too intimidating." Tessa giggled, placing her hand in his. "Fine," she said, her cheeks flushing. "But only because you asked so nicely." He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist as they swayed to the gentle melody. The night air was cold, but Tessa felt warm, safe in Liam's embrace. They moved slowly, the world around them fading away until there was nothing but the sound of the music and the steady beat of Liam's heart against hers. As the song ended, Liam leaned down and kissed her softly, his lips brushing against hers with a tenderness that made her knees weak. When he pulled back, he looked into her eyes, his expression serious. "I'm so proud of you," he said quietly. "No matter what happens at Nationals, I need you to know that." Tessa's breath caught in her throat, and she cupped his face with her hands. "And I'm proud of you," she whispered. "For everything you've accomplished. For everything you are." They stood there, holding each other, and for the first time in weeks, Tessa felt the weight on her shoulders lighten. Liam's love was a constant, unbreakable force, and it gave her the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The days leading up to Nationals were a whirlwind of last-minute preparations. Tessa balanced her time between classes and the rink, trying to stay focused and calm. Isabel made sure to keep practices efficient and purposeful, with an emphasis on mental preparation as much as physical. One afternoon, as Tessa stretched near the boards, she felt a surge of nerve. The national competition was the culmination of years of hard work, and the thought of stepping onto that ice in front of thousands of people made her stomach churn. Her best friend, Jess, who had come to watch her practice, noticed the tension on Tessa's face. "You okay?" Jess asked, coming over to sit beside her. Tessa sighed, bending forward to touch her toes. "I'm trying to be," she admitted, "but it's hard not to feel the pressure. Nationals could change everything for me." Jess put a comforting arm around Tessa's shoulders. "You're going to be incredible," she said with unwavering confidence. "You've trained so hard, and you're one of the most talented skaters I know. But remember, this doesn't define you. You're more than just your skating." Tessa looked up at her friend, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thanks, Jess. I needed to hear that." Jess grinned, giving her a gentle nudge. "Anytime, and don't forget to breathe, okay? You've got this." Tessa nodded, feeling a little steadier. She knew the path ahead was daunting, but with the support of the people she loved, she believed she could rise to the challenge. The morning of Nationals arrived, and the energy buzzing in the arena was electric. Athletes from across the country filled the space, each of them a bundle of nerves and anticipation. Tessa stood with her coach, Isabel, in the backstage area, her skates tied tightly, her costume glittering under the harsh fluorescent lights. The arena itself was massive, the stands filled with cheering crowds and banners waving in support of the skaters. The air smelled of popcorn and ice, and the familiar chill of the rink seeped into Tessa's bones. She inhaled deeply, trying to settle the butterflies that had taken residence in her stomach. "Tessa," Isabel said, her voice calm but firm, "focus on your breathing. Stay in the moment. You've trained for this and you're ready." Tessa nodded, exhaling slowly. Her heart pounded, but she clung to Isabel's words. She was ready. Every sacrifice, every late night, every bruise and fall had led her here. She had prepared as much as she could, and now it was time to trust herself. Across the arena, a familiar face caught her eye. Liam was standing with Jess in the stands, waving and grinning like a fool. He had managed to make time to come, even with his own hockey playoffs around the corner, and the sight of him made her heart swell. He gave her a thumbs up, mouthing, "You've got this," and she couldn't help but smile. Her name was announced over the loudspeaker, echoing through the cavernous space, and Tessa's heart skipped a beat. This was it. Isabel squeezed her shoulder one last time. "Go out there and show them who you are," she said. "I'm proud of you, no matter what." With that, Tessa stepped onto the ice. The cold surface felt familiar under her blades, and she skated to the center, taking her starting position. The arena fell silent, the weight of thousands of eyes pressing down on her. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, feeling the stillness, and then the music began. The first notes were delicate, like the opening of a story, and Tessa's body moved instinctively. She glided across the ice with grace, her arms flowing as she connected each movement to the next. The opening footwork sequence, the part Isabel had made her practice endlessly, felt smooth and controlled. Her heart raced, but her mind was focused, her body moving in perfect harmony with the music. Then came the first jump, a double axel. She bent her knees, took off, and rotated in the air, landing cleanly. Relief flooded her, but she didn't let herself dwell on it. The next few elements passed in a blur, each one a triumph over her fear. She was halfway through her routine, and everything felt right. But then, as she approached the triple Lutz, the jump that had haunted her nightmares, her confidence wavered. The crowd was a blur of colors, and for a split second, doubt crept in. "What if I fall?" she thought. "What if I ruin everything?" She pushed the fear aside, gathering her strength. "No," she told herself. "I've worked too hard for this." She built up speed, her blades cutting through the ice, and took off. Time seemed to slow as she rotated, her body twisting in the air. She held her breath, her entire being focused on sticking the landing. Her skates touched down, and for a moment, she thought she had it. But then her balance wobbled, and she had to put a hand down to steady herself. The crowd let out a collective gasp, and disappointment surged through her. "I can't let this shake me," she thought desperately. "I have to keep going." She forced herself to continue, her body moving through the next elements. The rest of the routine was clean, but the mistake weighed on her, a leaden feeling in her chest. When the final notes of her music played, she struck her ending pose, breathing hard. The crowd erupted into applause, and she forced a smile, though inside she felt like crumbling. She skated off the ice, her legs trembling, and Isabel met her with a hug. "You did well," Isabel said, her voice. "You recovered beautifully." Tessa nodded, though tears threatened to spill. "But the triple Lutz," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I almost had it." Isabel's eyes softened. "You almost had it, yes, but you didn't let that mistake define the rest of your performance. You finished strong, and that's what matters." Tessa swallowed hard, trying to hold herself together. She had worked so hard, and the thought of her mistake overshadowing everything she had achieved was gut-wrenching. Liam found her in the hallway afterward, his hockey bag slung over his shoulder. He rushed to her side, pulling her into his arms without hesitation. "Hey," he murmured, his voice warm and reassuring. "You were incredible out there." She buried her face in his chest, the tears she had been holding back spilling over. "I almost nailed it," she choked out. "But I stumbled, and now I don't know if it was good enough." He stroked her hair, his embrace comforting. "You didn't give up," he said, his voice steady. "You kept going, even when it was hard. That's what makes you amazing, Tessa, not whether you were perfect." She clung to him, drawing strength from his unwavering support. Slowly, the crushing weight of disappointment began to lift, and she took a shaky breath, pulling back to look at him. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "for being here, for believing in me." He kissed her forehead, his lips warm and soft. "Always," he said, "no matter what." The next hour was agonizing as the scores for each competitor were tallied. Tessa sat with Isabel, Liam, and Jess in the stands, her stomach in knots. The leaderboard was displayed on a massive screen, and every time a name moved up or down, her heart lurched. Finally, the announcer called out the final rankings. Tessa's breath caught as she saw her name appear. She had placed 4th, just shy of the podium. The crowd cheered, but Tessa felt a pang of disappointment. 4th was an achievement, she knew, but it wasn't the medal she had dreamed of. Isabel squeezed her hand. "You should be proud," she said gently. "4th in the country is nothing to scoff at." Tessa nodded, though the sting of coming so close burned. She forced herself to smile as she stood, turning to her friends. "I did my best," she said, trying to believe it. "That's what matters." Liam took her hand, his eyes full of pride. "You were phenomenal," he said. "And this is just the beginning. I know you'll reach the top one day." Jess pulled her into a tight hug. "4th place is amazing, Tessa. You've come so far." Their encouragement helped soothe the ache in her chest, and she took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. Nationals had been a roller coaster of emotions, and while she hadn't achieved her ultimate goal, she knew this wasn't the end. It was a step in her journey, a stepping stone toward future victories. 2 days later, it was Liam's turn to face his own test. His team had made it to the playoffs, and the game was crucial. Tessa stood in the packed hockey arena, her hands clasped together as she watched Liam skate out onto the ice. The crowd was a sea of jerseys and banners, the energy pulsating with anticipation. Liam looked focused, his eyes sharp and determined. Tessa knew how much this game meant to him, and she could only hope he felt the same unwavering support from her that he had given her at Nationals. Jess stood beside her, bouncing with excitement. "Liam's got this," Jess said confidently. "He's been on fire all season." Tessa smiled, though her nerves were palpable. She knew how hard Liam had worked, how many hours he had spent perfecting his shots and strategizing plays. He deserved this moment, and she prayed that he would come out victorious. The game began, and it was immediately intense. Both teams played with a ferocity that kept the crowd on the edge of their seats. Liam's team fought hard, each player giving everything they had. Liam skated with incredible speed and precision, his stick handling the puck with practiced ease. Midway through the second period, Liam had the opportunity for a breakaway. He stole the puck from an opponent, skating down the ice with a burst of speed that made Tessa's heart race. He weaved past defenders, his eyes locked on the goalie. The crowd roared, and Tessa held her breath as he pulled back his stick and took the shot. The puck sailed through the air, and for a split second, time seemed to freeze. Then it hit the back of the net with a satisfying thud, and the arena erupted in cheers. Tessa jumped up, screaming with joy as Liam raised his arms in triumph, his teammates piling on him in celebration. "He did it!" Jess yelled, hugging Tessa. "That was amazing!" Tessa's heart swelled with pride, and she couldn't stop smiling. Liam had worked so hard for this, and seeing him succeed was exhilarating. She knew how much it meant to him, and the joy on his face was everything. The game continued, the tension mounting as the clock ticked down. In the final moments, with the score tied, Liam's team fought tooth and nail to gain the advantage. Liam found himself in a perfect position, and with a skillful pass from a teammate, he took another shot. The puck sailed past the goalie, securing the win with only seconds to spare. The crowd went wild, and Tessa screamed until her voice was hoarse, tears of happiness streaming down her face. Liam's teammates lifted him up, and the arena echoed with chants of victory. Tessa made her way down to the rink after the game, and Liam met her with a grin that lit up his entire face. He pulled her into his arms, spinning her around. "We did it!" he yelled, his voice full of exhilaration. "You were incredible," Tessa said, laughing as he set her down. "I'm so proud of you." He leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said, his voice soft and full of love. "You inspire me every day." Tessa's heart melted, and she kissed him, the world around them fading away. They had both faced their battles, and while their journeys were far from over, they knew they had each other. Together, they could conquer anything. Epilogue. 1 year later, the crisp winter air carried the familiar scent of snow, mingling with the distant hum of skates gliding over the ice. The outdoor rink was strung with fairy lights. each one twinkling like a tiny star in the early evening sky. Tessa stood at the edge of the ice, her breath forming puffs of white in the cold. She laced up her skates, her heart brimming with a mixture of excitement and nostalgia. It had been a year since Nationals and Liam's unforgettable playoff victory. The months that followed had been a whirlwind, filled with triumphs, setbacks, and countless moments of growth. Tessa had worked tirelessly on her skating, pushing herself to new heights. She had landed a spot on the national team and traveled to international competitions, representing her country with pride. The triple Lutz had become her signature jump, a symbol of her resilience and determination. Liam, meanwhile, had become a star player for his college hockey team, earning accolades and the admiration of fans. Scouts from professional teams had begun to take notice, and he was on the brink of being drafted. But despite the pressures and opportunities that came their way, Tessa and Liam had remained each other's greatest source of support. Ready? Liam's voice broke through her reverie, and she turned to see him approaching, his own skates glinting under the rink's lights. He wore a scarf wrapped snugly around his neck, his cheeks flushed from the cold, and his eyes sparkled with the same playful mischief she had come to adore. Tessa smiled, reaching for his outstretched hand. "Always," she said, letting him pull her onto the ice. They glided hand in hand, their skates moving in perfect harmony. The rhythm they had developed both on and off the ice was seamless. As they skated, laughter bubbled between them, echoing in the frosty air. Tessa loved the way Liam made her feel so light, so free. She couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. From enemies forced to share ice time to partners who shared dreams and unwavering belief in each other. "Think you can keep up?" she teased, letting go of his hand and skating backward with a challenging grin. Liam smirked, pushing off with a burst of speed. "Oh, you're on," he said, chasing after her. They raced around the rink, weaving between other skaters, their laughter carrying over the sound of blades slicing through the ice. When he finally caught up, he wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her to a gentle stop. "You never let me win, do you?" he asked, his voice full of mock exasperation. Tessa tilted her head, her eyes dancing with amusement. "Where's the fun in that?" He chuckled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Fair enough," he said, his voice growing softer. "But seriously, I'm so proud of you, Tessa. Watching you grow, seeing all you've accomplished, it's incredible." Her heart swelled, and she placed a hand on his cheek. "And I'm proud of you," she whispered. "You've come so far, and I can't wait to see where life takes you next." They stood there, lost in each other's gaze, as snowflakes began to drift down from the sky. The world around them seemed to pause, and in that perfect moment, everything felt right. They had both faced so many challenges, but they had done so together, finding strength in each other. As they skated off the rink and into the warmth of the nearby lodge, Tessa couldn't help but feel a sense of hope for the future. Their dreams were still unfolding, full of possibility, and she knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it side by side. Liam pulled her close, wrapping an arm around her shoulders as they stepped inside. "So," he said, a playful glint in his eyes, "how about we grab some hot chocolate and plan our next adventure?" Tessa grinned, leaning into him. "I'd like that," she said, her voice full of warmth, because with Liam by her side, every day felt like an adventure worth taking. Hey everyone! If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support means a lot and helps this channel grow. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.